Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 154. So today we are going to be talking about finding pleasure after trauma. And this topic came to me a few weeks ago, almost a month ago now. And it's interesting because I completely lost the the atmosphere, the sense, the kind of focus of this message that I received. So I think it's actually not an accident that we're coming back to this today to kind of revisit this topic that came to me almost a month ago. So I'm just going to jump into the story of how this came to me, and then we'll kind of go through what am I talking about, what do I mean by pleasure, what do I mean by trauma, and how do we find pleasure after trauma. So almost a month ago, I was in Mexico with my husband and we were taking a few days off, and I had found a mobile massage business that would come out to the house and do a couples massage, kind of set up 2 tables, give us each a massage. And they spoke English, which was great because our Spanish is still not very good. So it just makes it a little easier to communicate. So we set up this couples massage, and I realized I got on the table and it was a beautiful massage, but I realized it's been a really long time since I got a massage just for fun, like just for relaxation, just for enjoyment. Most of the body work I receive is kind of problem focused, like we're focused on this pain in my neck, or we're focused on an emotional release, or we're focused on the tendonitis I seem to have developed in my elbow, stuff like that. So it had been a really long time since I'd really just received a massage for the sake of receiving a massage. So the first thing I noticed, because there's not really a language barrier, like they spoke pretty good English, but this is sort of, again, kind of supposed to be a spa experience. They put music on, and there was really no talking other than, a couple check-ins about how the pressure was or having you turn over. It was really just completely silent with this nice relaxing music. And it's been a really long time since I've received in that way, where there's not a release happening, there's not checking in. It was just kind of silence and relaxation focused. So the first thing I noticed was that I actually, it was like a very poignant moment. Like tears kind of came to my eyes because I was like, when was the last time that I just allowed myself to receive in this like relaxation format of not having an intention for something specific, of just like allowing myself to relax and kind of receive pleasure. That word had not come to me yet, but there was this feeling of like, wow, this is so nice. This is really nice. So then I thought, well, it's been a really long time since I've kind of visited my celestial realm. I've just been so busy. And at night, I try to kind of check in and do some meditation. And a lot of times it's late and I'm tired and I end up falling asleep. So I was like, I'm going to go check in with the celestial realm, kind of see what's happening and see where I end up going. Just kind of do a little vision quest, if you will, while I'm receiving this beautiful relaxation massage. So I started in the halls of learning, which is kind of a lot of times my sort of landing spot. When I have these visions, I kind of start in the halls of learning, and then there's other places I can go from there. Or I'll get kind of called somewhere, pulled in a certain direction, or someone will show up and I'll start having kind of a conversation all in this, kind of vision state. And so for whatever reason, I was called to the Akashic Records, which is not something I work with very frequently. But the idea of the Akashic Records is essentially every soul has a big book of all of your lives and all of the journeys that you've been on and the purposes, what your soul's purpose is. And a lot of people like to kind of go into this space, and people will do Akashic Records readings, and it can help shed light on some past life issues, some like overarching themes across different lifetimes, the purpose of your soul, like what you're here to do, what your calling is, things like that. And I thought, I'm just going to check in with my Akashic Records and like see what's there, because it's just not something I do very often. And I thought, for whatever reason, I was called there. So all of a sudden, this giant, big, thick book kind of like appeared in my hands, and it was like a very old-timey kind of parchment papery book. It was this big, thick, really, really thick book. And as it kind of appeared in my hands, it was open to the very last page. And I was like, kind of looked down at it and I was like, I mean, what does that mean? Like, am I done? What, what's happening here? And this voice kind of came to me and it said, look at all of these things that your soul has already done, like all of these pages, this big thick book of all this work that you've done, all of these lifetimes, all of these accomplishments that your soul has made toward whatever the purpose of your soul is. And this voice said to me, what if this lifetime or the rest of this lifetime was all about finding pleasure? And I was kind of like, what? It was very unexpected and kind of disconcerting. And so the voice kind of repeated, what if your entire purpose in this life is to just experience pleasure? And I was like, but I'm here to do this and this. And I started thinking about all the work I do and how I'm called into it. And, I'm like, I have this calling and I have this work to do. And the voice kind of said again, trying to get me to understand, I think, changing the message a little bit, like, look at all the work you've already done. It kind of pointed out all of this thick book. Like, what if you've done your work? What if all of your work in this physical plane spiritually is finished, and what you're here for is to experience pleasure? What if that is your purpose in this life, to just experience pleasure? And it was like very, again, disconcerting, like kind of mind-blowing and disconcerting. And it was so interesting because I was in the middle of this, sort of pleasurable experience. And then I started thinking about what is pleasure. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I started kind of digging into the message a little bit more. But it was just really interesting. It was really, because here I was thinking, I was going to get this, you need to get dimensional frequency expansion out to more people, or you need to extend your community and create safety for people, or continue your trauma healing work, whatever it is. And the message I got was, what if the entire focus of your life, the rest of your life, should just be about finding pleasure? Now, this doesn't mean that you don't find pleasure in things that are also productive, but let's talk a little bit about first, what I mean by pleasure, and then I've titled this episode Finding Pleasure After Trauma. So let's talk again also about, why is it so difficult for us to find pleasure? What is it about having a traumatic background that means we have a hard time with pleasure? Because that's what was really going on for me, was this idea of, I'm here to work, I'm here to do, I'm here to accomplish. That is a cultural trauma that everyone has, this idea that your worth is tied to your production. We've talked about that a lot. We'll go into that a little bit. But the first thing I want to kind of focus on here that I really started thinking about is what is pleasure? Because the word is very specific. You are here to experience pleasure. You're in a bodily form that experiences pleasure so that you can experience that pleasure. And so I started thinking about what does that really mean? What does pleasure really mean? Because it's kind of a charged word in our society. We've sort of tied pleasure, I think, with what I might call hedonism, or this idea of sort of instant gratification, like decadent foods and things like sex and things like all of the things that people tend to get addicted to started out sometimes as these kind of hedonistic pleasures, or the instant gratification type pleasure. And that's not really pleasure. That was kind of the first sort of thought process I went through here. This is not the pleasure that my spiritual guides are talking about. And not that you can't absolutely experience pleasure through something like food and intimacy and all of that stuff. It's sort of like the intention. So if the intention of doing something that's going to bring you, let's say, a hit of dopamine or a hit of serotonin, scrolling through social media, that gives your body chemicals that mimic pleasure. But for most of us, that actually feels like kind of an empty pursuit. And there's all sorts of studies now that show that social media actually leads to dissatisfaction, kind of the opposite of pleasure, being unhappy. So I think the reason, your intention for seeking pleasure is important. If you are seeking so-called pleasure to kind of fill an emptiness in you, or because you want to mask your pain, that's not really pleasure. That's more like addiction, instant gratification, hedonism. I'm going to use that word, kind of an empty pursuit of what feels like pleasure. And the way you can kind of know that is that the more you do this thing, the less happy you get. And the more you kind of get this shame spiral about, I always talk about food because that's my quote unquote drug of choice. So, it's this idea of like, I can absolutely get pleasure out of really enjoying a dessert because it's just really calling to me, and the chocolate tastes good and it feels good in my mouth. But if I eat too much of that dessert, or I eat three desserts, or I keep pursuing that, that's really more about, again, kind of filling some emptiness or numbing some emotions. It's not really about the pleasure at that point. It's interesting to me in my journey through trying to release eating disorder and welcome in this intuitive eating that is still very much a work in progress. What I've realized is that I don't actually like food that much, which is crazy. I mean, I do, but I would have told people, oh, I love food and that's why I eat. Like, no, a lot of times I eat because I'm nervous, or I eat because I'm uncomfortable, or I eat because I don't know what else to do with myself. Like, there's all these reasons that you might do something that for one person brings pleasure, for another person actually brings this like emptiness, or this pursuit of filling emptiness, or what turns into something like an addiction. So it's important that we define pleasure in like a spiritual way, because that's what this is, like this deep well of spiritual pleasure that kind of starts at the sacral chakra, which probably not coincidentally, we are in this kind of sacral chakra throat opening right now. And the sacral chakra is the center of pleasure in our body. And the throat, a lot of times, is how we express that pleasure. We make a sound of delight, something like that. So let's talk about like what did this spiritual guide mean by pleasure? Because again, that took me a while, because the first thing, it was like, I'm here to work, like I'm here to do. That's kind of the thing. And pleasure, real deep spiritual pleasure, is really about being. And so one of the reasons that it's really hard to find pleasure if you have a history of trauma is because most of us with a history of trauma are disembodied. And in order to really enjoy pleasure, you have to be present in your body, because pleasure is really kind of a physical experience on this plane. Like, you can have emotional pleasure, absolutely. You can have spiritual pleasure. I get that all the time. But the guidance that I was receiving is about, like, you're in this spiritual plane for a reason. Why are you not experiencing the physical sensations of pleasure? So I spent kind of the rest of those few days away, first in the massage, just really enjoying the feeling of, having my muscles just gently massage. It's a really relaxing thing. Your body starts, your breath deepens. You start to come out of fight, flight, or freeze. You come into that rest and digest. That's another thing. We can't find pleasure when we're in that triggered nervous system response. We have to be in that rest and digest, in that ease response, in order to find pleasure. And so I focused for the rest of that massage on just noticing, how does this feel in my body? How do I feel relaxed? Like, what does pleasure really mean? So, and the beach is one of my happy places. So then we were at the beach, and it was like, I started to notice, like the pleasure in the sun on my face, and the pleasure in, just being in the sand, and kind of the softness of the sand and the sound of the waves. And so then, interestingly, we got back, and a few days later, I went into a session with my craniosacral teacher, Heidi Wilson, here in Tucson. And a lot of times in those sessions, I have these very specific memories that come up. But this was sort of a continuation of this theme of pleasure, of finding enjoyment. And some of that is releasing tension, releasing the things we've been holding on to that are kind of getting in the way of that physical experience of pleasure. So in this session, I had this vision, and instead of it being like a specific memory, it was like all of these moments of childhood where I was really present in my body and really experiencing pleasure, and probably kind of taking it for granted, because when you're a kid, you don't know any different. You just think that's what life is like. So I could hear just really vividly the sound of the snow as it crunched under my boots when we were sledding. And then I could hear the like whoosh, the sound of the sled, and the feeling of the pleasure of like the sled going down the hill, and that kind of little bit of rush of adrenaline, and the wind on my face. And then I could taste the hot cocoa that we used to have, and like how excited we would get when we would be allowed to put marshmallows in our hot cocoa. You would watch your marshmallows melt and then kind of, drink your hot cocoa, or being really cold and then sitting in front of the heater. We had kind of a room heater that you could sit right in front of to warm up. All of these things, these are all pleasure signals. These are moments of pleasure that we experience a lot, I think, as children and kind of lose our connection to. It's this delight in actually being in a body, delight in the smell of, like, one of the other memories that came through was the smell of leaves and the crunch of leaves when you walk through the leaves, or jumping into a pile of leaves. It's like the movement of your body, the smell, the feeling, the tactile feeling of like the wind on your face, things like that, the taste of that hot cocoa. But there's something about really being present in your body, being embodied, and being in that present moment, that is what gives you that sort of deep well of pleasure that comes up from the sacral chakra, up from our pelvis, and kind of like up through the body. And it's so interesting that in adulthood, a lot of that stuff is just lost because we're not focused on being in the moment. And again, this is a cultural trauma. This is one of the reasons why I say everybody has had trauma. So you may have had personal trauma, developmental trauma as a child. I think everybody has social trauma. And then we've got this cultural trauma of this idea that your worth is tied to your production. And then on top of that, the increasing costs of everything in the last couple of years means most people have to work more and more and more and more just to make ends meet. So in that trauma, like, where do you find pleasure in that when you're constantly under pressure about whether you're going to have enough money to do things, or about whether you've done enough for the day? My husband and I we talk about, we'll have a day off, which I don't get a lot of anymore. And my first instinct is always like, what do I need to catch up on? Whether it's stuff around the house or it's like the list of things I have for my business. And it's really hard to just be like, hey, what if we went out for a walk and just enjoyed the nice day? Or what if we went to play some golf or something? And then there's all these things that get in the way that are essentially trauma triggers that kind of keep us from really experiencing pleasure. And it's interesting because my original idea for this show, or the question that came up with all of this stuff when I was it was all percolating now for several weeks, was this idea of like, what happens after the trauma healing? When you're quote unquote done healing trauma, you rediscover pleasure. But there's a couple issues with that because we're kind of never done healing trauma. It's just sort of how the world works. I call it spiritual excavation. Like, you excavate and then there's something else to excavate. But what I will say is, when you're out of that most acute phase of trauma, when you've released some things and you're learning, when you've retrained your body to have at least some period of time coming back into that rest and digest, that parasympathetic mode, you can start to rediscover pleasure. But it's got to be intentional, and it's got to be a choice, because our culture is set up for that hedonistic, instant gratification emptiness. Capitalism itself, I could go off on a whole tangent. I will try not to, but I just went to Target today. I never go into stores anymore. And there's just crap everywhere. Little statues, little knickknacks, like Easter's coming up, baskets, all of this stuff that really doesn't serve much of a purpose. Again, a moment of happiness, that sort of empty happiness, and then just like more debt or more things you have to deal with or more stuff in your house. And not to say that you can't get pleasure out of things, out of objects, but I don't think most of us really are at this point. I think we're going through the motions. There's this feeling of kind of keeping up with the Joneses, as people say, trying to keep up with your neighbors and have as nice a car as they do, as nice a house as they do, have the nicest lawn it's rocks here, but things like that. Oh, I got to decorate for Easter, I got to do this. Oh, I got to do this. And that obligation feeling that I've got to takes all of the pleasure out of that stuff. Like, you might find total delight in a little rabbit statue, and that's fine. But thinking about what's connected to that, oh, okay, yeah, I got to put stuff out for spring, and oh, this is $20, and then I got to pay for that. And then, there's all of this stuff that is attached to these things that for most of us makes this not really pleasurable. Consumerism is not pleasure. And again, not that you can't find pleasure in things, and not that, the occasional splurge on something isn't treating yourself and not something that you can enjoy. But doing it over and over again, or doing that solely to bring yourself kind of to fill up that emptiness, that is not pleasure. Pleasure, all these memories of me as a kid, the things in my memories, I mean, I had to have boots to be out in the snow. We had a sled, just one of those plastic sleds that at that time was probably less than $10. Little packets of hot cocoa and something to drink out of. Like, we don't need a lot of stuff to find pleasure, because pleasure is really about coming back into the body and being present in the moment and noticing. I just did this 6-module course with my friend Barbara Collier through Equanimity here in Tucson, and it was equine assisted somatic experiencing, and we were learning how to retrain the nervous system to focus on, in her words, something neutral, pleasing, or pleasurable. So a lot of times, because we're in that fight, flight, or freeze so often, we're sort of we've trained ourselves to look for the negative, look for the bad, look for the threat, look for the threat. That's what that kind of fight, flight, freeze, fawn response is. And so just in just a moment, in 30 seconds, the oxytocin breath produces oxytocin. That's called the pleasure or the love hormone. That's one of the reasons I teach that over and over and over again, because 3 of those breaths will begin to bring your nervous system out of that fight, flight, or freeze. And when you're out of that, you can start, and another way to bring yourself out of that is to start focusing on something neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. So you might be in a situation where there's nothing pleasant, there's nothing pleasing. I'm in the dentist chair. Like, what's neutral in this space? What can I find? Maybe my jaw hurts and my neck is uncomfortable, but, my legs feel supported and comfortable, or there's some nice music playing and that's neutral, or maybe it's pleasant or pleasing. So this is another way we can start to train ourselves to look for pleasure, which also in turn trains the nervous system to come out of that fight, flight, or freeze. So the link here between, like, how do we find pleasure after trauma? That's the question I posed for this episode. It's coming back into the body. It's re-embodying or patterning embodiment for the first time for a lot of us, being fully present in the body, and then retraining the body to focus on things that are neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. And what you'll find is you might start with something neutral. And like one of the examples Barbara used was like, with chronic pain, like right now I have chronic pain in my shoulders and my neck. And so like if I start to pay attention to my body, it's like, oh, that's really uncomfortable. And that tends to draw our attention, right? Because that feels like a threat. That feels like the thing that needs to be addressed. But if I kind of scan through my body a little bit more, like actually what I noticed today, I had a little bit of an IBS flare up and it's gone, and my belly feels really good today. My belly feels relaxed. It feels spacious. So I focus on that. Again, sometimes it starts with just like, where do I not have pain? Maybe it's the tip of my nose. There might be, because the pain is not in the entire body. Where is something neutral? Where am I not in pain? You can start there. And that's why I was like, oh, man, my belly was kind of upset yesterday, but today it feels okay. And not only does it feel okay, it actually feels good. And I feel this kind of expansion, and I'm talking about pleasure, and I feel a little bit of like a heat down here in my low belly that is kind of that pleasure response that tells me I'm really enjoying myself. I enjoy doing this show. And that's the last thing I'm going to say is, work and pleasure are not mutually exclusive. I get a lot of pleasure from my work, but I have to remember that it is still work. That when I am not completely sort of self-focused and present in my own body doing something just for the joy of doing it, then there's an aspect of work to that. And so, there's that old phrase like, love what you do and you'll never work another day in your life. Like that's garbage. That's poo. I mean, people, if you look at people like celebrities, like I used to think, oh, I want to be a world famous singer and I want to tour. That is a really hard life. Getting on a tour bus, constantly being on the go, having to turn things on, yes, the reward is very large. And there's a lot of pleasure in performing. I still get pleasure in performing. I did a sacred sound journey last night that was just so beautiful, and there were beautiful people there. It was a very pleasurable experience, but there's also the pressure there for me around holding the space, making sure that everyone feels safe, kind of, starting the journey on time, ending the journey on time. So it's not a completely pleasurable experience. So trying to trick yourself into thinking that you're getting enough pleasure from your work, you need moments of pure pleasure. You need moments that are completely focused on just finding pleasure. And again, that message I got from my guide, like, what if the whole purpose of your life here was just to find pleasure, was to experience pleasure in a physical body, because you can't do that in the spiritual plane. You don't have a physical body. And I'm always the one like, oh, I'm not a big fan of the physical body. But then at the same time, you can't experience physical pleasure if you don't have a physical body. And being focused, as trauma does, it focuses you on the threat. And that is how you survived your trauma. Whatever your trauma is, whether it was physical, whether it was emotional, social, cultural, sexual, the focus is on survival. That is what the body focuses on. And so we've got to retrain ourselves to focus on at least the neutral to start, and then the pleasure or the pleasurable. One of the directives I've given to a few of my clients now is to start a pleasure journal. So kind of similar to a gratitude journal. It's to write down, like, say, 3 things throughout the day that brought you pleasure. And again, these are usually going to be sensory experiences. I saw the most beautiful sunset. There were so many colors in it. It was so amazing. It just made me smile. It felt really good in my body. I had the most beautiful cup of hot chocolate, and it had this rich chocolatey flavor. So focusing on the sensory experience of the pleasure is what is going to help you start to retrain yourself to learn how to experience pleasure again. And you may need help with this, because there is a lot of triggering stuff that can come up. Because if you've never felt safe, or you're just starting to feel safe, it doesn't feel safe to focus on something that feels like it can be taken away from you. And I think that's what a lot of us fear about this idea of pleasure. What if I have this enjoyment? And that's why we can't find pleasure in things. I absolutely get so much pleasure from my singing bowls. I love them. They are amazing. But could I find pleasure if I didn't have any of them? I could find pleasure in using my voice, which is one of the reasons why I always tell people that your voice is your most powerful tool for sound healing, because it's in your body. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to pay any money to use your voice. So it's that idea of, like, absolutely, we can get pleasure in many different places, and external things can help deepen, find the pleasure in our own body through that sensory experience. What is it that I love about my bowls? I love the beautiful resonance of them. I can feel this bowl. I'm holding it in my hand. I can feel the vibration in my hand. I can hear it. This is my soothing bowl I brought specifically for today's meditation. This is bringing me pleasure in my body. I'm experiencing the pleasure of this through listening to it, through the feeling of the vibration, through the expansion I get just from hearing the beauty of this sound, the soothing quality of this sound. So finding sensory things you can focus on that bring you pleasure, that is how you start to rediscover pleasure after trauma. So what we're going to do in today's meditation, I completely did not plan this at all, but what we're going to do is just spend a little bit of time working with that idea of finding something that's neutral, pleasant, or pleasing in your body, in your environment. It could be the sound. It's raining right now. That rhythmic sound of the rain. We don't get a lot of rain in Tucson. It's so beautiful. It's bringing me so much pleasure. So we're going to do something like that. We're going to scan through the body, see if we can find an area that is at least in a neutral state, right? I have had a headache for a few days. It's finally let up. It's not great, but it's neutral. It's not in pain anymore. It's not even really in discomfort. It's a little bit tight, and I can live with that. And from there, it's like, oh, but wait a minute. Actually, if I scan down further, like my shoulders actually feel better than they usually do. And if I scan down further, my belly feels really good. So there's a way to find that pleasure, that pleasing sensation in the body or in your environment. I look out at the tree line and I feel relaxed because I can see the sky. Things like that. We're just going to do a little bit of noticing. If you're outside, I find it a lot easier to find pleasure outside unless it's really hot, or right now it's raining. But looking in your body is really important too, because that brings you back home to your body. So that's what we're going to focus on in the meditation today. So let's meditate together. For this meditation, find a really comfortable position. You can sit up, you can lie down, whatever feels good. The more comfortable you are, the more supported you feel, the easier it will be for you to find some pleasure in the body. So just find a position that feels really good. Maybe you're cozy with a blanket. Maybe you've got your knees propped up. Maybe you're lying back in your favorite recliner. Whatever feels good to you here is great. And then in order to signal to our bodies that we're ready to explore some pleasure, we're going to take 3 deep oxytocin breaths. And we're actually going to do this with the intention of bringing pleasure. So we're just going to mentally kind of think of pleasure. Sometimes it's nice to have a little smile as you do this. And we're going to breathe in through the nose, let the belly float out strongly. And while we hold that intention of pleasure, we're going to sigh that breath out with an audible ha sound. And just notice how that feels in the body. We're going to do that at least 3 times. I'll do one with you together. Thinking of pleasure here. And as you do a few more of those, just notice already the shift in your body. I did one nice deep oxytocin breath with that idea of pleasure, a little bit of a smile on my face. And I notice already that I feel calmer, I feel more relaxed, I feel more present in my body. I'm more aware of my feet on the ground. I just spent a bit of time in the mental space. I'm talking about today's topic, and doing that oxytocin breath allowed me to come back home into my body, be more aware of the lower part of my body. So you can reintroduce that oxytocin breath with that focus on pleasure anytime throughout this meditation that calls to you. It's a great way to kind of redirect yourself back to the body and back to pleasure. That breath, the vibration of the nerves in that breath vibrates the vagus nerve. That tells the body, I'm safe. It tells the body to produce oxytocin, which is sometimes called the love hormone or the pleasure hormone. So we're doing a little bit of a hack of our own nervous system using that oxytocin breath. And we're going to use another little bit of a trick through this exercise of focusing on something that's neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. So just bring your awareness into your body now. And what you might find is the first thing you're sort of led to focus on is something that's uncomfortable, something that feels painful, some sort of discomfort or tightness or tension. You might find that just moving the body a little bit can help kind of dispel some of that tension. So that is definitely an option. But then come fairly still and just scan through. See if you can find somewhere in your body that feels neutral, meaning it's not in pain. You might go straight to something that feels good, and that's fine. But sometimes it's a little bit of a step, especially when we're in pain. Sometimes it's like, everything hurts. My whole body hurts. So you might find, does the tip of your nose hurt? How does the tip of your nose feel? And you might find, I don't even know where the tip of my nose is. You might have to kind of look around for it. You might have to move it a little bit to figure out where's the tip of my nose. But the chances are something like that, the tip of my nose, the tip of my ears, my eyes. Just find some part of your body that feels neutral. There's no pain, there's no discomfort. Maybe it's not particularly pleasurable, but it just feels sort of neutral. Maybe take a couple more deep breaths here. Just notice how that feels. And from there, maybe allow your awareness to be drawn to something that actually feels pleasing or pleasurable. If you can't find it in the body, that's okay. You can look for this outside the body. If you can find it in your body, it's great. Like today, my belly feels really good. It feels expanded. It feels relaxed. Sometimes I have a lot of discomfort in my belly, and today not only is it neutral, but it actually feels pleasing in there. I feel kind of a nice flow of energy. It feels kind of open. It feels a little bit warm. It's a really beautiful, pleasurable feeling I'm finding in my low belly here. But if you're not able to find something that feels pleasurable in the body, maybe just pay attention to your surroundings. Maybe you look out the window and you notice, what do the trees look like? Maybe that brings you a little bit of pleasure. Looking for some color, looking for some life. Maybe you see an animal, a bird. Maybe you're in the room with your little dog and he's sleeping and snuggled up in the blankets. And that feels really nice. That feels pleasing to kind of look at, or you hear his little snoring breaths. Just find something that brings a little bit of a smile to your face. This doesn't have to be the most amazing feeling you've ever had. Again, we're looking for neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. And as you focus on that, just close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, focus on whatever it is that you found that felt pleasing. Maybe it's a sense of rhythm in the body. I feel kind of a flow of rhythm, and my body actually wants to move with that flow, and it just feels really nice to move my body a little bit in a way that it's asking for. Maybe there's a little bit of motion that feels good. Maybe you've been in motion all day and feeling still really feels good. Maybe you've got a blanket on and the heaviness of that blanket feels good, or the warmth feels really good. Maybe your skin feels nice and warm with that blanket on. Again, just looking in the body for this sensation of something that's neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. You can also, I've started just kind of lightly brushing my hands up and down my thighs. It's actually a little chilly in the room I'm in. So this is bringing some warmth to my legs. This feels really good. We're just looking for, again, neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. So find it in your body, even if you were focused outside your body now. Again, maybe you do a little bit of light brushing along your skin. That tends to produce a really pleasurable feeling, kind of stimulating the nerves, really lightly brushing down my arms now. Been having a lot of pain in one of my arms. So this just light feeling of kind of stroking on my arm feels really good, especially where I know there's a lot of tension and there's been some discomfort. You might even decide to give yourself a little gentle scalp massage. That's one of my favorite things that feels really pleasurable. Or maybe you've got something around you can kind of roll your foot back and forth on something like a tennis ball. Or just even stretching and moving the feet a little bit, or the neck. Really gentle here again, just focusing on something that feels neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. And remember that you can come back to this. I suggest that you do this practice a few times a day just on your own. Look for some pleasure. You might be in the middle of a really stressful work day. Can you take 1.5 minutes to look out the window and notice what the sky looks like? Can you take 3 minutes to listen to a song you really love that brings a smile to your face, or look at some photos of someone you love that makes you smile? Why do you think we love memes so much and kitten videos They bring us pleasure. Looking at children playing, looking at animals, all of that is something that actually brings us pleasure. We spend a little bit of time in the moment noticing, looking at something, smelling something. Maybe you have some flowers in your house and they smell really good. Just take some time throughout the day. You might even set timers on your phone 2 or 3 times a day. Pleasure reminder. Take 3 deep oxytocin breaths with that intention of pleasure and find something inside your body or around you in your environment that has that feeling of at least being neutral. And from there, it's usually not too far of a leap to find something that's pleasing or even really pleasurable. So for the last part of this meditation, bring your awareness down to that low belly. This is that sacral chakra, that region of pleasure. And you might decide it feels nice to do some gentle stroking here, just kind of rubbing the low belly, bringing some warmth to this area. This is a really charged area for most of us. We've been taught from an early age to suck our belly in, to keep our belly tight. So just for this next few minutes, like totally relax your belly as much as you can. You might find if you're sitting that you actually kind of slouch as you do that. Like that's okay for this, for the purposes of this, for this few moments. If that feels uncomfortable, bring a little bit of tone back in just to straighten your back. But as relaxed as you can possibly keep your belly and still be sort of in a comfortable position. Doing this on your back might feel really good. And again, just gently kind of rubbing the belly, bringing some flow of blood to this area, maybe getting the lymph moving. As it feels good, you might stop and just keep your hands on the belly, directing some energy there. If you've been rubbing the belly, there's a little bit of energy built up that might feel like heat coming out of your hands. One of the ways we can call energy through the body and out through the hands is to kind of rub the hands against something or rub the hands together. So you've activated your own innate Reiki, your own innate universal life force energy to come through the hands, just directing it at that pleasure center now, the low belly. And just notice here in the low belly if you can find that sensation of something that's neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. I've had a long history of a lot of belly pain, so just being able to find a neutral in this space is actually pretty pleasurable for me. Like, oh, I don't have any endometriosis pain anymore. How amazing is that? How pleasurable is that? That after years and years and years of really intense pain, I can be pain-free. And that might be an area to start. Maybe you do have some pain in this area, but maybe there's one little area you can find that feels neutral. Maybe you come up in the belly a little higher if the low belly is bothering you and you focus there and that feels neutral. Just see what you can find. This is just a practice. There's no pressure here. If today's not the day to find pleasure, that's okay. You can come back and do this tomorrow. Again, just really focusing on now, maybe if you found that neutral, maybe you can find a little bit of pleasure. Again, maybe the heat from your hands feels good. This is our center of creativity. So lighting this up, you might think about something that you really enjoy doing. Do you like to create? Do you like to do crafts? Do you like to cook or bake? Do you like to draw? Do you like to sing and make music? Do you like to write? Whatever feels creative, you can do almost anything in a creative way. And that's a really good way to kind of light this area up, is to think about something you'd love to create. Maybe you've physically created children, and that's a sublime creation. Just spending a few moments here, just noticing if you can find some pleasure in this space. You can go back and repeat the lower dantian recharging meditation. That can really light up this area. We're actually doing a little of that now by just holding our hands on the pelvis, directing that energy. I'm assisting you here with some Reiki through this transmission into that low belly area. You might want to picture something here, a beautiful pool of water, a waterfall. This is a watery area of flow. Creativity is all about flow. Maybe you see a beautiful field of sunflowers and it's just moving back and forth in the breeze. Or you're looking at a tree and you can see the tree kind of gently swaying in the wind. Maybe you're at the ocean and you feel the rhythm of the waves. Just find yourself a visual or something you can imagine, some combination of words that brings a sense of flow, a sense of rhythm. You can keep it simple here. You can just imagine turning on a faucet and listening to that water flow. Maybe you're standing next to a river and you can smell the little bit of that metallic scent of the rock, or you're outside and it's raining. You can smell the pavement after a fresh rain, during the rain, feeling this flow, this watery flow in that sacral chakra region, just really beautifully supported here. Stay with this visualization. We're going to do a little bit of flowing sound here to assist this energy. We're just asking for some pleasurable movement of the energy within this pelvic area, this sacral chakra region. Ooh, hi, hi, hey, hi, hey. Ooh, hi, 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 hey, hi, hey. Ooh, yeah, yeah, hi, hey. Ooh, yeah, yeah, hi, hey. Ooh, yeah, yeah. Ooh, yeah, yeah. Ooh, yeah, 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 yeah. Inviting this beautiful flow to come with you now into the rest of your day or evening. Coming back to this. The more flow we have in this sacral region, the more access we have to our own bodily pleasure, to that sensory experience that is really a spiritual experience, being fully in your body, fully in the moment, noticing something that brings you joy or delight, that brings you pleasure. That is a spiritual practice. It's a beautiful spiritual practice. And you deserve to feel that pleasure. You deserve to take a break from production, a break from work, a break from worrying about all the things you have to do, and to just be in the moment, even if it's just for a few moments, to focus on something that really feels good in your body. Something that brings you that sense of joy, of wonder, of enjoyment, that is neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. And the more you do this, the more you train yourself to find those pleasing moments, and the more pleasing they will be. Oxytocin is one of the only hormones that is a positive feedback loop, meaning the more oxytocin your body produces, the more your body tells itself to produce more oxytocin. The more pleasure we notice, we bring, we receive, the more pleasure there is to be found. And you deserve that pleasure. If you've had your hands on your belly, now's the time to just gently release that energetic flow. Again, you can come back to this if you'd like, as many times as you'd like. If you're in a place where it's safe to do so and you'd like to let yourself drift off to sleep, this would be a beautiful state from which to do that. If you're coming back to the rest of your day or evening, just begin to slowly move your body again. Really gently, again, noticing the neutral, pleasing, or pleasant sensation of moving the body, especially if you've been still for a while. It might feel good to get some movement in. Just slowly coming back to the rest of your day or evening. Take one more deep oxytocin breath with that intention of pleasure in mind. In through the nose, sigh it out with a smile on your face. Notice the shift in your body. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Take some moments throughout the next few days, the next week, the next month to notice some pleasure. Notice something that's neutral, pleasant, or pleasing. Again, even set yourself an alarm once an hour. Take a minute or a minute and a half to notice something that puts a smile on your face, and you will begin to notice more and more of that pleasure, and you will begin to feel the flow that pleasure brings. Even in this kind of chaotic world of doing all the time, we can find a way to step back into flow and allow ourselves to notice that pleasurable moment that is just in this present moment. It only exists in the now, and that's actually a really beautiful thing. Have a pleasurable rest of your day, evening, and week. I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.